completely rewatched this series, I've come to realize how far off the track this franchise has gone with all the series following it. No, I'm not saying this franchise is in massive decline in terms of a subjective quality or anything. Personally, I think there has been good stuff, including the current series, though it does still have problems, which you can watch my weekly reviews for more on that, shameless plug. Now, objectively, toy sales have been massively down, which of course has led to Toei hitting the panic button. I kind of went over this stuff in the first part of this series, but since then, I think I might have found some other reasons why this particular series still remains the franchise's biggest financial bomb. I'll get more into this at the end, but for now, let's wrap up this little retrospective with the last 11 episodes of Gold Princess Precure. We return to this series appropriately enough with Kanta and his violin, and right off the bat, I'll say one of the best bits of this episode was how they kind of acknowledged how the relationship between Kanta and Towa was naturally awkward, as the last time they talked with both of their memories intact was back when they were little kids. It's the reason why ultimately Haruka had to be the one to restore his memories. Plus, it would play into this episode with Towa wanting to help her family and kingdom that she had lost for so many years. Though, before we get into more of that deep writing, here's one more Toei ad. Yeah, I hope you don't mind that your priceless, well-tuned instrument has been replaced with a massive poor quality plastic. And from one thing to the next, our protagonists found themselves in the Forest of Despair thanks to the royal key and Towa saying this little phrase. Royal Majesty. Seeing their kingdom covered with all those weeds didn't sit well with the former residents, in particular Kirara and Towa. In the case of the latter, it led to a flashback where we got to see the king and queen as well as their subjects. Wow, would you just look at all those lolicons? I mean, okay, I'll admit, I'm half jokey about this stuff, as this episode does kind of clarify how Hope Kingdom was taken down, and how it wasn't immediately after Towa disappeared. I just kind of find it ridiculous how much focus the show places on Towa's kidnapping as being the main cause of their downfall, even though it has been standing likely long before she was even born. I mean, all you really have to do is tell me that Hamon launched a full-scale attack, then I would totally believe no kingdom would stand a chance. In the case of Kuro, we actually got to see the moment where he became a vessel for the evil frog hoodie. You know, for kids! While they were looking for the little guy, Despair found them and sent her Lobo? Well, not a bad choice for an Avenger, but I will always remain a Jolter stan. As mentioned earlier, Towa throughout this had been heavily affected by seeing the current conditions of her kingdom, likely amplified by her own guilt, as well as feelings of detachment from having been torn away from it for so many years. As a result of the latter, she did end up forgetting the words of her parents. While she did have her own sins to burden, they were not something to bear the weight of alone. So yeah, it's pretty much the same lesson she learned during her debut, but to be fair, in such a triggering situation like this, it is justified that she would need to relearn it a little. And if anything, at least we got to hear her awesome theme play again. Not now, dude. Let the girl have her moment. Also, apparently her middle name is Delight, so yeah, that's a thing. Anyway, as an interesting mechanic for this final arc of the series, each of the Cures would gain their own unique special attacks utilizing their little plastic castle. The finisher did remain the same, though the final Gokigenyo would go to the Focus Cure. It's a decent way of changing things up and not making everything feel like they're endlessly being recycled. With that, Towa used Overheat and it was super effective. And after a really beautiful session with her brother that I wish I could play here if only Content ID wasn't a thing, Towa learned why the Royal Key wanted to bring her specifically to the kingdom. She used all 4 of her keys to unlock the palace where Twilight originally found the 4th perfume. As a result, it was purified and became a stronghold for the protagonists that will allow them to slowly take back Hope Kingdom. So basically, the last leg of this series is Warcraft Precure Edition, though I will take it over anything that comes out Blizzard these days. Anyway, a fantastic episode that really shook things up after a massive shakeup. It wrapped up Towa's story arc, plus clearly outlined the protagonist's final mission in this series. Great stuff that surprisingly wasn't written by the head writer, Jin Tanaka, but rather a secondary writer, Mutsumi Ito. I'll bring this more up at the end because I do think this is something that some more modern series should really take note of. With things wrapping up, we reached essentially the climax to this show, and really this whole franchise's best side character ever. Having been inspired by recent events, Yui decided to enter into an art contest at their local museum. The theme of it was of course something rather on point for this franchise. Can someone get this company a thesaurus? Lack of vocabulary aside, this was actually a really well-written episode, like one of those that we didn't even really need the big monster fight at the end, though it didn't get in the way either. Still, I love how they did a very realistic portrayal of the struggles artists like Yui go through, especially in a competitive environment. Stuff like trying to figure out the proper composition, going through tons of drafts, experimenting with different styles, and in the end, sometimes not even figure out what to draw in the first place. Yeah, I'm just drawing some snow. What do you think? Her struggles were only further exacerbated by how much her friends, and really everyone around her, were progressing steadily with their respective dreams. Then again, all of them did have at least some preset criteria that they could follow, while as an artist, Yui had a literal blank canvas to work with, which could be seen as both a blessing and a curse. I think I do get a similar feeling, like when I make these videos, like does this background look better, or does this one? Blank canvases can give you many possibilities, but just as many headaches as well. Fortunately, she did at least have a lot of good friends who were willing to support her and give her some cake that had been left out all night. I mean, I guess it could be a creamless pound cake or something, but we never see it, so it's hard to say. Still, in the end, Yui was just about ready to throw in the towel. However, a couple of encounters with Mochizuki and some young artists prevented that. And thanks to them, Yui finally got her. Guaranteed, if Drew were here, this would have been resolved in about 10 minutes, and I would have left satisfied. But yeah, thanks to them, she realized that sometimes you do have to go back to the basics, and remember that drawing can just be for fun at times, and not something you have to stress out over for some contest. Though of course, we still needed the requisite fight of the week, with Yui once again becoming the victim of the week, but even then, it did at least add to her story, plus it gave her this awesome moment. Someone who deserved to be higher than 20 in the NHK popularity polls. Seriously, I will never get over the fact that these idiots were higher than her. Of course, our main heroines came in to save their friend, as well as their stubborn principal. Nah, just a random cosplayer. But yeah, good fight animation as usual from these girls and all that. But really, the star of this episode through and through was Yui, as she even managed to regain consciousness from inside the Cage of Despair. Granted, part of that might have been because she didn't approve of what her Zetsuborg was doing. Dude, have some decency! Anyway, they defeated the flashy monster, and not too surprisingly, the episode ended with Yui winning an award at the contest for a picture that looked like fan art you'd find on Pixiv, but still good fan art. More importantly, it was one of the first major steps towards achieving her dream. Well, go find yourself a twin, and I'm sure some manga publisher will hire you on the spot. Next up on the story arc wrap-up list was Kia, who really needed to learn the importance of maintaining a low profile. Still, as a result of stuff like this, she managed to score entry into an international fashion expo as Japan's representative. To get ready for it, her manager scored her a intern to help her get ready. I'm sure you'll make a great Pokemon trainer. Just stay away from the shipping community. But yeah, buzz around her being Japan's rep was garnering her a ton of notoriety and support, including from the real world. Yeah, that has to be some fan art they slipped in, either that or the animators got really lazy. Of course, she also got some support from Karin. Nah, that's just a regular Dawn from Texas. Legit, I want to try one of these things. But yeah, Karin revealed that one of the main reasons she wanted to become a model was because she was inspired by a particularly sparkly model who she wanted to keep a secret. Gee, I wonder who it could be. Meanwhile, having taken notice of their new stronghold, Close decided to deploy his one-note lackeys, which of course did not refer to this guy. Have I mentioned yet how Shut is my favorite character in this show? But yeah, the two struck, and of course their victim was Kain, which couldn't have happened at a worse time, as Kia's flight to the International Fashion Expo was just about to take off. And she had a bit of a hard time going when she saw her intern's dream.
I am shocked! Shocked! Well, not that shocked.
Her team tried to deal with the Zedsporg on their own to let Kia catch her flight, but ultimately, the Yellow Cure couldn't just walk away. After all, what's the point in pursuing a dream if you can't share it with others? They defeated the Zedsporg, but noticeably, Kia didn't say the final Gokigenyo, but I'm sure that's not important. I mean, so what if she didn't catch her flight? Everything will just go back to the status quo and... Wait, there's going to be actual consequences? Yeah, for a franchise that tends to skirt around some of the more practical issues like how the hell does a fairy go about attaining a business license, this was some relatively realistic fallout for failing to fulfill such a massive contractual obligation. In a situation like this, I wouldn't be surprised if she ends up getting blacklisted from several companies, so yeah, good job not pulling your punches there. The episode ended on a rather melancholic note, with Kia honestly saying that she didn't regret her choice, but was still visibly affected, with even the final shot of her key being symbolically turned over. Also, I'm just noticing this while editing, but I think they might have thrown in this shot of her cold breath to give the illusion of her smoking like a washed-up has-been. Now that's some good symbolism. This continued right into the next episode, with her trying to forget about her problems with sweets and a few monster fights. No, Kia, you got it all wrong. You gotta use your latest group finisher and then completely shelve your much cooler individual finisher. What's this salt doing in my pocket? Obviously, she was trying to get her mind off of modeling, even requesting some time off from it, but of course, this didn't sit well with her manager, Kain, and Mr. How the hell did Toei not get sued over this? But yeah, Boan had come in to offer her a job that, as we'd later learn, would significantly refurbish her damaged modeling career, but she turned him down at first. And while everyone, especially her roommate, wanted to encourage her to not give up on her dream, Kia provided a very strong practical argument for why she couldn't do it, as you really can't be a full-time model and superheroine like she originally thought. I really appreciate how seriously this episode treats this issue, because when you get right down to it, there is probably no real solution to any of this. While ideally she should be allowed to do both, the fact is, active soldiers in a war don't moonlight as actors, as you never know when duty is going to call and inevitably interfere with everything else in their lives. In Kia's case, it was a huge gamble whether or not she'd be able to pull off both, as even reinforced by the end of this episode. Fortunately, she did at least have friends who were capable of reducing that risk, and to show her this, they cooperated with the school to put together a little event.
ドリームファッションショーへ。
Let me guess, are Nozomi and the rest of her team gonna show up for like all of 5 minutes? Nah, but seriously, this is a great scene with a ton of callbacks, like Haruka's brief run as a runway model, emphasis on brief, though this fashion show also ended up incorporating some other genres.
次の夢は街はお任せ、警察官、病気はお任せ、お医者さん。
Yeah, say this was written by Jin Tanaka and his cynical otaku mind, huh? But yeah, the idea of this show was to exhibit everyone's various dreams, not all of which related to fashion, with the exception of one formerly trained model. Kya rightfully criticized this all as a disorganized mess, but also recognized that maybe a little disorganization wasn't such a bad thing, especially if you have a few friends to help you along the way.
キラキラ輝く一番星、世界一のトップモデルだよ。
You see, Tendo, that's how you do it! With that, Kya was now willing to listen to Boan's proposal, and in a great bit of visual storytelling, we could tell just by Yui's expressions that it was a pretty critical offer. We couldn't actually hear what they were saying as it was being drowned out by the cheers of the crowd, as if to reinforce Kya's decision here. Though honestly, I could care less about all of that, and I'm more focused on Ronko.
私の歌を聴け。
Sing Soraya Days! And I'd be really kidding, Kirby sung one of my favorite renditions of the Grand Magan opening.
走り出した想いが今でも。
Of course, they also had to work in a big climactic fight for the conclusion to this arc. Ah, great, another Eternal Dragon. You know, the Dragon Balls are going to become less and less special when you keep making new variants of them, right? But yeah, well, a little son. This was at least one of the best animated one-off fights of the season, thanks to the tag team of Ken Ueno and Nishiki Itoka, who really got across Kya's rejuvenated resolve. With that, she did her requisite Gokienyo, and it was time for her Royal Majesty moment, as they claimed yet another stronghold in Hope Kingdom. Kya also revealed her talks with Buon, with him planning to make her the exclusive model to his latest brand. Of course, it would require a fitting and training period in Paris as soon as the school year was over. Yep, well, she was willing to spend the remainder of this show in chaotic disarray that came from being a supermodel and superheroine. She had made her decision to abdicate her title as Precure in the end. I really like this ending for Kya, showing that there is a life beyond the cute dresses and the super strength. And while it was a definite and kind of insane gamble as to whether or not they'd be able to resolve the conflict with the spear by the time the school year was over, that's kind of this yellow cure in a nutshell. Next up on the conclusion block was Minami dreaming about something in the waters.
そっちに何があるの？
Hopefully the Grand Ocean, since we still know next to nothing about it. Now, obviously, she was dreaming about the nigh infinite possibilities that lay within the oceans of our planet as a researcher. Of course, she was still unsure as to whether or not she should pursue these dreams, and was unwilling to consult her friends who were busy putting up the Christmas decorations. Seriously, can we not wait until at least the Halloween stuff is put away? Thus, Minami decided to consult with her teacher.
いいえ、小学生の時の夢はアイドルざます。
And while I have previously expressed my issues with the build-up to Minami's choice here, I do like the conversation they have here about people changing their career paths several times in their life. I do get the argument that it's kind of realistic for people to do this. I just don't think the more realistic narrative makes for the most interesting or coherent of storytelling is all. I honestly just wanted a little more build-up, especially if we could get at least a few more Minami episodes early into the series. Not a lot, just a few more, because at the very least she wasn't shortchanged. I mean, this certainly isn't at all the worst example of this franchise's fly-by-your-seat writing, but it almost does feel like the start of that bad habit that has unfortunately led to some backloading of character development in future series. Fortunately, that wasn't really the case here, as these developments felt overall organic, especially Kya being the first and most prominent character to consult Minami. This makes a lot of sense, as even during the events of Kya's arc, there were hints of Minami being envious of her friend getting her dreams organized, thanks to these little bits of characterization sprinkled throughout the 2 episodes. Now this is an example of a good habit that they really need to bring back. Just because you have a spotlight character doesn't mean you can't also use the opportunity to further develop other characters rather than just putting all of your eggs in one basket. As a result, I would call these interactions between the two some of the best in the series, as with her arc done, of course Kirara would want to impart some of her experiences onto her friend. Hell, while the rest of the team did get less focused, they were at least afforded some brief moments where they got to tell their blue friend off a little for trying to hide her struggles from them. Good stuff. But yeah, they of course had a Monster of the Week fight, with Shut using the teacher as his victim. And while there was some good drama here of Minami briefly losing her mojo due to all of the stress of choosing between her career paths, let's face it, the real star of all of this was Best Boy here. Okay, I'm kidding a little. I mean, we will get back to him in just a minute, but Minami was given some good time to shine, as after the aforementioned encouragement from her friend, she began her counterattack. She got her Gokienyo in, but not her castle just yet. And the episode ended with her planning to study abroad, like with the marine biologist Asuka. Yeah, I gotta make that distinction now. She would have to move to Florida, though at least she didn't have to go immediately, hence why I guess there wasn't as much shock as there was with Kirara. Granted, there were still obstacles to overcome, as seen in the next episode. She of course still needed to get her parents' approval, which she discussed with Asuka. Wait, I thought she was in Florida. I mean, of course, I'm not saying it's impossible for her to come to Japan, just a little overly convenient for this whole exposition dump and everything, but whatever, I'm not paying for the plane tickets. And this was a nice scene where we got to learn the origins of Minami's fascination with the ocean. Still, while her struggles were gripping, I was honestly more invested in Best Boy here and his imminent pink slip. Says the lady who constantly does her lipstick. Seriously though, I love the direction in this scene, as we actually got to see Shut's makeup start to run as he was sweating bullets. And appropriately enough, they started to look like tears as he begged the spear for one last chance. Back with the Precure, they had their little Christmas party that they were setting up for in the last episode, which also included a talent show where Yui kind of cheated by using the talking animals. Though at least we got a legit highlight from our heroines and their cute little insert song with some questionable choreography. Hey, don't look at me! This is the show that had a whole parade of fish fuel just a couple episodes ago. However, there was a cloud of dread floating above Minami that could be felt throughout the festivities. Again, I gotta applaud all of the subtle emotions this character could get across with just a few awkward smiles that eventually all boiled over into one big gut punchline. Realizing that she really shouldn't hold it in anymore, the rest of her team encouraged Minami to meet with her folks. She went to get ready at the same time the other star of this episode was about to go all in. To his credit, Shut wisely decided to isolate one of his enemies away from the others. Now you see, this is what happens when you don't give Gamera a new film in a decade and a half. And unfortunately, for what's supposed to be the closer to a character's arc, the fight here was a little underwhelming. Still good, but I think I would have preferred if they switched the crews between this and the last episode's fight scene. But whatever, Minami's speech here about her dreams being as deep as the ocean, and this final sequence compensated for it. With that, they defeated Gamera and claimed their third stronghold. And the episode, of course, ended with Minami spilling her guts to her parents, and them being just totally cool with her decision. I mean, yeah, it's still a really well-directed, emotional scene, encouraging the viewers that you can be honest with your parents, as generally they'll be understanding. I especially love some of the angles here that really got across Minami's feelings of distance from her family before they went in for a hug. Good stuff, with my only really minor complaint being some of Mr. Kaido's delivery here. Was there no better take where he didn't sound like he was being sarcastic? But now, we reach the conclusion to the most important character arc in this show's Shuts. Yeah, kinda surprisingly, there were actual consequences for his failings from the previous episode, as he was unable to return to his home at this dark. Conversely, our heroines discussed their plans for heading home during their winter breaks. Would one of them have to look like butterscotch? Hey, this is a Komura episode, it's totally possible. Though I think she also enjoyed writing for Towa, whom, considering her connections with this dude, was probably the most appropriate choice for this episode. Moreover, both characters didn't have a home to return to because of the same tyrant. Fortunately though, Towa had a ton of friends who were willing to recreate her home out of snow. Though honestly, I think they might have done too good a job for, a bunch of middle schoolers, but I'll give it a pass since we've got to see Ronko a lot over these past few episodes, along with a bunch of other callbacks. Yeah, another thing the season handled really well was some of its recurring side characters, many of whom had just some really fun personalities. Shet unfortunately wasn't having a lot of fun, but hey, this guy has always been entertaining, so maybe he can give us a good laugh here.
あんな鳥以下だというのか。
Yeah, I can't really laugh. This is actually kind of sad. Seriously, I know I'm kind of coming off like a stan for this dude, but for an antagonist in this franchise, his arc has been handled insanely well. He started off as a one-dimensional narcissist who could have easily been offed as an early game jobber, and yet he's maintained such a consistent presence throughout the series with a slow burn fall from grace that has just been so engaging. I'll get a little more into it at the end, but let me just say for now, this guy is easily one of my top antagonists for this entire franchise. Another thing that really sells me on this character is Satoshi Hino's amazing performance. I mean, I know he's mostly recognized as the OP Skullman these days, but come on, this is some great acting.
そうだ。砕いてやる。貴様も。
But yeah, with nothing left to lose at this point, he decided to take his frustrations out on his former e-girl idol and her snow castle. And as the fight went on, he became progressively more feral, as the Cures rather savagely pointed out, like, legit, I'm cheering for this guy more at this point. He eventually went one-winged angel, or Ken in this case, so the Cures finally decided to show a little mercy on the dude and purified him with their finisher. Okay, Toei, now you're just pouring salt in the wounds. Towa tried to comfort Shut by saying that Twilight wasn't what she considered to be beautiful anymore, which at first kind of goes without saying, she was being brainwashed after all. Though there is a little more to it that we'll save talking about for the character analysis. Still, Shut rejected a full face turn just yet, but did accept a scar from Shamor, whom, yeah, I do kind of ship these two. I mean, they are both cats. With that, the episode ended with the snow castle being reconstructed, everyone heading back for the break, and Best Boy getting one of the coolest shots in the show. Again, I know I'm kinda simping for this dude, but he's just such a great character. But yeah, jokes aside, I guess we do need to wrap up the main character's arc. Episode 47 opened with Haruka having finally made a good cup of tea after she couldn't even open up the lid properly at the beginning of the series, and finding some winter flowers.
スノードロップって言うんだ。花言葉は希望。
Shut up, Nagito! Also, I'm kinda surprised it took you this long to show up. At the same time though, Despair had recognized that the heroines were just one castle away from taking back Hope Kingdom, so she lured them to her doorstep. They arrived at the castle, where Haruka saw what appeared to be the bird from our Flower Princess book. She didn't question why it happened to look exactly like a character illustrated by an author who had no connections with Hope Kingdom, as it lured her right into the castle. Needless to say, this was a trap to prevent her from unlocking the castle.
ようこそ我が城に。花のプリンセス。
Then again, I guess it is hard to turn down Prince Irma here. Sure enough, the Spear had pulled the old Dream World tactic from the evil villain playbook, giving Haruka her dream scenario of becoming a princess. Not a bad trope to use by any means, and it makes sense for this villainess who pretty much did the same thing with Towa, but it is still worth some snark.
さあ、召し上がれ。あなたはただ笑顔でいてくれれば、それでいいのです。
I particularly recommend the red ones. Those are the good stuff. Meanwhile, Stop and Freeze tried to deal with the rest of the team with their usual performance arts, though noticeably, Clothes was nowhere to be found. Gee, I wonder if this is gonna symbolically tie back to a certain plot point. Back with Haruka, Iruma was laying on that undeniable charm that was slowly erasing her memories of the outside world. However, the illusion started to fall apart when the flowers just decided to pull some cheap Disney magic and grew instantly. Naturally, Haruka was off-put by how creepy this was, but also by how the flowers just grew with no issues or effort. Though to be fair, Dark Twee here isn't exactly wrong either.
これ以上何を望むのです？すべてあなたの望んだ夢の世界なのですよ。
For any princess and superheroine in Haruka's case, wanting to make the lives of those around them better should always be the ultimate goal. Thus, an idealized world like this should be the logical conclusion, and yet that's all it ever really should be, an ideal. Like flowers, people gain strength because they go through obstacles. If you're just given it, then can you really say you earned it, or that you're even satisfied with your so-called accomplishments? For this flower princess, the answer was obvious. Ah, damn it, Haruka, you went and broke the Neo World program. And, not too surprisingly, Close turned out to be the Monokuma of this world. They did try to hide this reveal by having the bird be voiced by a different VA, but I think the voice of Shinobu Omiya is kind of a dead giveaway for how evil this thing really is.
これは当て字なんですよ。そうなの？はい、元はピュン。
Anyway, the two return to reality to continue their fight. Close correctly pointed out that by denying the idealized world, Haruka's journey towards ultimate princessdom would only lead to an endless road. To which Haruka responded with basically, yeah, thanks for pointing out the obvious, dude. In fact, didn't we already have this conversation before? Don't get me wrong, I don't think it's objectively bad for Haruka to essentially restate the thesis to her character arc, while also expanding on it a little. It just feels a little clunky here, since her big scene back from about 10 episodes ago already did a really good job stating most of the messages of this episode that would later again be repeated in the final episode. Regardless, they defeated the Mothra Zetzborg and unlocked the final stronghold. And with that, they basically completed their main mission for the show, which was to take back Hope Kingdom. So, yeah, we're all good here, right? Just gonna have a little after party and then...
あとはあの絶望の扉を開ければ
Jeez, why now of all times does Sora have to be busy with Smash? And like most JRPG final bosses, just when you think the main mission was done, the spear came back with another play in that she decided to do a little relocating. With that, we entered into the 3-part endgame of the series as the spear launched her attack on the human world, of course starting with Noble Academy. I was expecting more of a colony drop rather than the origami, but whatever, her actress has roles in both shows. With the big bad literally knocking on the door, or at least having destroyed it, everyone's attention was on the school, so our heroines had to do the classic hero reveal. As a nice touch, they also had the appropriate side characters react to their transformations. Oh, it's also worth mentioning that this was the first episode of this franchise to be animation directed by the insane Sakuga master that is Kodai Watanabe. I bring it up here because I think special care was given to all of Ronko's reactions for obvious reasons. Anyway, as an in-game battle, everyone wound up getting involved, including Kanta, Shamor, and eventually the rest of the side characters.
絶望からみんなの夢を守るためにずっと戦っているんです。
Did anyone else wish Yumi Itabo was around at times like this?
俺たちの夢を
Though before we get there, they had to deal with some mid-bosses like the remains of Locke, who had been forcefully turned into a servant of the spear, which shocked the Cures even though he wasn't that much of a better person when he tried to be a Starscream. I mean, I get it, they feel bad that she's taking away his free will when even a certain someone else disgusted by it, but come on, you don't have to make this face turn so damn obvious. Anyway, after some signature Watanabe attack runs, our heroines managed to push the haunted hoodie back, so Close gave him a little despair boost.
そんなプリンセスロッドが
Damn, the QC on these toys really need some work. Yeah, more on this at the end. Fortunately, the Precure did have something in their arsenal that was much stronger than just some cheap plastic. As had already been built up a few episodes back, Yui again regained consciousness in the Cage of Despair, and...
That was awesome!
Together with the fairies, because this is a Komura script, they managed to wake up all of the side characters who had become a part of the show's opening.
みんな戦わなきゃって思ったの。はるかちゃんたちが勇気をくれたおかげ。
New theory, Yui's the daughter of Mikoto and Guy, making her the Princess of Braves. That's my headcanon, and I'm sticking with it. The sudden loss of despair painfully incapacitated Locke, forcing Close to take over, and oh come on, do I really have to compliment this guy any more than I already have?
プリキュアどころか妖精も 人間どもも変わるぞ私たちも
Yeah, sure, he got KO'd shortly after, but come on, that's why we love this guy. Anyway, the episode ended with them purifying Locke, a great introduction to a very talented animator for this franchise who would only get better. I honestly wanted to say more, but I think it's better if you just go watch this animation showcase for yourself. Rolling right into the next episode, after we got a creepy bit between Despair and Close, we got okay, now she's really starting to look like Hamon. Still, our heroines weren't afraid of giant U-types.
私たちの夢は始まったばかり終わりになんてさせない
Haruka, you do realize those are usually the last words of a cancelled manga? I mean, your show still has at least one more episode, so you don't have to rush things. But yeah, unfortunately, the animation did take a little dip here after Watanabe clearly went all out with the budget. It wasn't bad, as some of these shots do look great, and I do think they ultimately distributed their money for this endgame wisely, considering this episode, plot-wise, needed the least amount of action, as there was a little more dialogue here, like Despair revealing her not too surprising true nature. I mean, it's pretty much in her name.
あなたは
So, would that make you an ally or foe of the Space Bunny? As a result, she was just a total damage sponge, completely tanking everything our heroines could throw at her. As a result, it wasn't long before they ran out of options and power. From there, she absorbed all of the trap people, and oh god, why do you have to put the door there, lady? Anyway, the Earth's population was whittled down to mostly just our heroines, a handful of adolescent little brats, and the Golden Girls.
Well, we're boned.
Nah, of course, this is the penultimate episode, so we gotta have at least some sort of last stand. In this case, something along the lines of PR and Space's finale with the normal humans getting involved after seeing the fairies do their best. An awesome moment for all of these side characters that thankfully didn't have to involve that. And fortunately, each of them ended up receiving shards of the broken princess rods, producing keys.
なんだかわかんねえけど託すぞ春野
Oh, come on. Y'all could do better than that. I mean, just look at this guy. Though these keys to victory created doors rather than a giant hammer, meant to be opened with the princess keys, and okay, y'all are taking your motifs just a little too far. Still, the show's opening started to play to really get this across as the final battle. All the while, the Precure's friends and allies defended the heroines as they raced to the doors, which included a resurrected Locke who just kind of came back after being blasted twice, and in spite of the trauma he caused, Kuro let him be his host again. Yeah, this was a bit of a rushed villain redemption arc, but whatever, we got shut, so that's all that matters. And the whole sequence itself was really well done, and I especially like the half-transformed Cures, as without their hair extensions, it kind of gives off a helmetless Sentai or Ranger feel, which is always cool, as it narrows down the divide between the normal person and the superhuman. At the doors, they literally unlocked their Grand Princess forms, and after one last beam battle, they defeated Despair with, okay, I'm not even gonna bother with a Kingdom Hearts reference, you can do it yourself. Still, as a final boss fight, that was a little underwhelming, so thankfully, the final episode gave us the true final battle with this guy.
絶望は消えない
Well, at least he didn't say Phoenix. I mean, I think I've done more than enough Soldat J jokes at this point. Not that that's gonna stop me. And fittingly enough for the series, they gave us another opening variation for the final episode, which included Grand Princess Haruka and Close going full JoJo reference. A nice send-off, really showing off the sheer amount of creativity this great opening managed to produce. Anyway, Close, as the new King of Despair, restarted his late master's instrumentality project, all the while staying the rather standard main rival quotes which caught Haruka's attention. She realized that she had to
Go it alone from here.
and after hiking up her dress a little, she went one-on-one with the Birdman. And of course, for this series, they pulled out all the stops for this final battle, with it almost seamlessly being handled by several talented animators including Kazuhiro Ota, Ryo Onishi, Kosuke Yoshida, and Shingo Fuji. Absolutely amazing stuff, directed by the show's character designer Yukiko Nakatani, who really knows how to balance out a ton of different styles. This was unfortunately interrupted by a moment of reflection of the series from Haruka, though thankfully it was just a brief one. I do wish he didn't say despair so much, as if this didn't already feel like a final battle in a Danganronpa game, but I guess it was a necessary evil for this.
絶望はどこにでもあるの。それをなかったことになんてできない。なくしたくない。
If you try to completely deny the existence of despair, then you're pretty much just a sociopath who can't accept reality and know better than ultimate despair. But yeah, realizing that they were two sides of the same coin, though one had a lot more facial animations than the other, the two called their fight a stalemate after Haruka totally felt up the dude's pecs.
強く優しく美しくか。
Hey, don't forget the goal part, that's really important. But yeah, as far as final boss fights go, this was one of my favorites of the franchise, even though the villain technically lived. Now I'll explain why during the closing thoughts, because frankly, there's a lot to look at here. Anyway, they opened the door to despair, and again, don't even try to make sense of the key mechanics in this show, and they released all of the captured civilians, including the people of Hope Kingdom. So, yeah, happy feels all around. Towa's back with her parents and all that. Are we good this time for sure? Well, yeah, actually a little too good, as their keys then decide to deactivate, and thus need to be returned to the kingdom, along with their ability to traverse between the two worlds.
つまり僕たちもお別れってことろま。
They did let Towa stick around until the end of the semester, which was also when Kya had to leave for Paris. And while this franchise isn't exactly known for subtlety, I did love how melancholic this final tea time was, as they tried to just glaze over the fact that this would likely be the last time they'd all be able to do this together. Of course, there is a limit to how long you can hold it in.
トワッチ。
For Towa, these were likely the first real friends she had ever made, and for all she knew, might be the last real friends she could make, so it hit extra hard for her. But her friends, especially Haruka, tried to at least send her off with smiles. With that, we then got a little montage showing what all of the one-off side characters were up to, which was cute, though let's face it, the absolute most important epilogue here was Shuts, who now had Locke possessing his scarf, giving him some very gaudy colors. But hey, at least he seemingly got a job at Noble Academy, so at least he wasn't going to be a bum anymore. Still, I guess we do have to end the series with our actual main character, as she said her farewells to both Kanata and the key that started it all. And while I personally didn't really interpret the relationship between these two as being anything more than platonic, it's also impossible to deny the impact that both the prince and his key had on jumpstarting Haruka's life, and now she had to say farewell to both. Thus, more than saying goodbye to a good friend, this did hit the Flower Princess a lot more, but after that initial despair comes the new hope that drives us towards a new future.
奇跡を稼ごう。
We then got one more epilogue, which honestly felt kind of needless, as this was a perfect shot to end on. I mean, it wasn't bad, and it does give me a little more to talk about in the character analysis, but okay, now it's really over, and oh, I almost forgot about the handoff scene, and nice to meet you there, Mirai, and everything, but okay, now this is just getting too complicated. Can we just go back to that last shot of Haruka running into the distance? Okay, that's better. So, Go Princess Precure ended with Haruka running towards a new future. The end. Gold Princess is amazing, and while I personally prefer the style and themes of Hardcatch just a little more, this still easily remains a top tier series for me. This final quarter in particular was quite good, giving overall satisfying conclusions to all of the main protagonists and antagonists. This was helped by the fact that there was a solid 11th hour quest that gave us some final developments for our leads that also didn't overstay its welcome or feel repetitive. I still think the third quarter of the series was better, as that was where the bulk of the development was, in my opinion, but this was still a very satisfying conclusion. Really? I can't think of any low points regarding this show, other than maybe its sales figures, and unfortunately, it would end up having arguably some permanent damage on the franchise as a whole. Though before we discuss those figures, let us consider the implementation of these toy ads in the actual show, as really, these were some of the best examples of this in the franchise. All of the keys introductions felt earned, as they were tied in with significant character moments for each of our heroines. Moreover, after gaining their shiny new keys, that also didn't mean that the originals were useless or forgotten about, as they were still used on occasion and ultimately were all needed for the final arc. And that's another thing, they did a good job clearly establishing the rule that they needed the original 12 keys to complete their mission. Yes, it was a kind of blatant gotta catch them all-esque bit of advertisement, but at least it narratively worked here. They also did kind of break the rules by having Towa's keys also become relevant to the restoration of Hope Kingdom, even though they hadn't even existed until that point, but whatever, it was tied into a character arc that we will cover in just a bit, along with the main plot. On the technical side of things, well, what else needs to be said at this point about the animation? There's a good reason why this series covers 6 pages worth of entries on Sakugaboru. It just flabbergasts me how even some less plot-relevant episodes got some amazing action sequences. That's pretty much unheard of with the more modern series, kinda because of this show, but more on that at the end. For now, I will say this is probably a significant breakout show for a lot of animators in this franchise. We already pointed out Watanabe's debut episode, but we also got Yukiko Nakatani providing her first character designs and animation direction, and of course the MVP Nishiki Itaoka providing the most key animations he's ever done for a single series in this franchise. I mean, good lord, can someone tell this guy he ain't working at Ghibli? Music was incredible, again thanks to Hiroshi Takaki coming back for another series. Of course, for a show like this, they went with more classical music, which meant more violins, which I always appreciate. It's one of my favorite instruments. I honestly wish I could play some tunes here, but I kind of want to avoid the copyright bots since they have been breathing down my neck a little more than usual. Regardless, you can probably guess what my favorite tune from this series was. And of course, the opening theme, Miracle Goal, was just great, complemented by the evolving credits that also kinda reflected the escalation of the conflict as the lyrics shifted into their latter verses. The first ending theme, Dreaming Princess Precure, was okay, a little disjointed with how it seemed to be unable to stick to just one music genre, though of course the standout of all of this was the second ending theme, Dreams Are the Path to the Future, one of my absolute favorites in the franchise for its amazing and expressive animation, plus the fact that it had 4 different variants for each of our main heroines. That's an awesome little detail that also gave us some introspective to their character arcs. On that note, let's get into the characters by, as usual, starting with the villains. Despair really didn't have much of a character, and honestly, she didn't need one. I mean, if you told me Yoshiko Sakigabara was playing a Precure villain, then this is pretty much what I would imagine. Just an intimidating, evil witch, almost on par with Disney's original Maleficent, she was just meant to be an embodiment of despair, and thus only ever needed to feel like an unstoppable force of nature. Not that she was a brainless brute either, as she did have some decent plans, like kidnapping Towa to lower the morale of Hope Kingdom. She would also brainwash the little girl into her early teen years, which just kind of added to her complete monster status. Not at all a complex antagonist, but again, you don't have to be when you're arguably one of the strongest U-types ever. Stop and Freeze were mostly just mindless minions. They did kind of have personalities in that they were sometimes curious about stuff like how the human mind worked, or why Shut was so obsessed with makeup. But ultimately, all of that went nowhere, they were turned back into weeds, and then I think killed off by Close when he absorbed them, so yeah, moving on. Locke was the requisite Starscream of the season, who was taken out much faster than the jet robot. As a result, of the original 3 generals, he probably got the least development. Not that it really mattered, because in my opinion, he just wasn't that interesting of a character. I mean, as a villain, he was certainly effective, using clever and even kind of genre-savvy tactics by doing stuff like actually taking advantage of our heroine's requisite gokigenyos to steal their keys. He came arguably the closest to defeating them had he not let his overconfidence get the better of him. He was just a smug little brat, often acting high and superior and not showing many other emotions. Thus, when he did have drastic mood swings, like when he turned into the giant raging frog, or pulled a face turn, it just didn't feel earned. The latter especially since, again, he was out of commission until like the finale, and then he just came back after Kuro just kind of forgave him for leeching off his body. Honestly, I don't really hate or like this character, I just can't get a solid grasp on him. Not a bad villain, as he did at least generate some decent conflict for the second quarter of the series, but maybe there's a reason hoodies aren't as much in fashion these days. So yeah, the rogues gallery of the show was far from perfect, but thankfully, they were held up by two top-tier antagonists in this whole franchise. 3 if you count Twilight, but I've decided to talk more about her during the Towa section of this. In any case, let's talk about my favorite character. Shut is right up there with Team Rocket as one of the most lovable jobbers in all of anime. They're just those antagonists that we know will never be able to defeat their respective protags, and yet because of their fun and endearing personalities, we end up cheering for them regardless. This was greatly helped by the fact that he was the most consistent villain in the show, appearing significantly in all of the arcs, interacting with, and ultimately working under all of his fellow antagonists. Much like Bumby, it made him a lovable underdog villain, especially when everything was just not working out for the poor guy. From being power creeped into irrelevance to his idol e-girl quitting on him, he just couldn't catch a break. As a result, his turn was very believable. He realized that by working under a bunch of sociopathic tyrants, he would only be used and abused until he was of no use to them. While this started off as a bit of a running gag since he was a villain, as we got more attached to him, we really could start to feel bad for him. It was through Towa, and especially Shamor, that he realized he needed to start to pursue his own happiness. Hopefully he was able to find some working at Noble Academy, or maybe even the Pre-Holic. All that said though, I do have to admit, Close was probably the best villain in the show. Not only did he become the true final boss, but he did by not even needing to pull a Starscream. In fact, until the very end, he absolutely believed in the rhetoric of his master, and by extension, the very concept of despair itself. This ultimately gave him the biggest leg up amongst his cohorts who were either a traitor or a complacent narcissist. Not that he started off much better, as he was a bit of an unfocused moron, but as the series went on, he realized he needed to shape up and take his job more seriously. In many ways, he's kind of like the evil version of Mei shonen protagonist, complete with the appropriate haircut. As a result, he became an unstoppable juggernaut in order to match up at every level with the actual protagonist. While I personally like Shut more, I can't deny that this guy went through one of the best villain arcs of the franchise, building a stronger dedication to his malicious causes. Allegedly, Mitsuaki Madono had a blast playing this character, and it's not hard to see why. If this is what Soda J would have become if he hadn't pulled a face turn, then I doubt even the King of Braves could have defeated him. Moving on to the side characters, we'll start off with the low-key MVP of the show, Yui Nanase. While she could have easily just remained the quirky roommate to the main protagonist, she chose not to be, much to the delight of everyone. As while this franchise has had a few human allies with no connections to the magical kingdoms, Yui was arguably the most proactive amongst them, having mostly chosen to get involved after realizing how out of the loop her friends were keeping her. As a result, a lot of people were hoping that she'd become the 6th Ranger, even though the OP all but confirmed that Towa was going to be it. This was even lampshaded later in the series, but unlike, say, Regina, whose character really would have benefited from becoming a cure instead of being shelved for much of the series, Yui never really needed the frilly dress. She did more than her fair share as crowd control and moral support to our heroines. And if that wasn't enough, she was the only normal human to escape from the cage of despair on her own. Thus, giving her powers would have actually taken away from her badass normal status, and more importantly, negate her actual role in the series. That being, showing how normal people have to do their part in saving the day and protecting each other's dreams. The epilogue even seemed to indicate that she essentially archived her friend's dreams through her picture book, showing how dreams can continue to be passed on to the next generation. She's easily one of my favorite supporting characters in this franchise, thanks to having a very amicable personality and, yeah, a cute design that Yukiko Nakatani would retroactively turn into a cure later, but never forget the OG. Kanata was pretty cool. Not that much of a fleshed out character since he took up more of the mentor role, but hey, I'll take him 6 ways to Sunday compared to a certain other pre-boy. He mostly served as a living MacGuffin for the series, being the one who originally gave Haruka her key, and then later shattered those same dreams because of a case of plot-convenient amnesia. Fortunately, he did get better, and did at least have some legit cute and really touchy moments with his sister. Ultimately, while he was a bit more of a plot device, just giving the heroines all of the accessories they could ever need, and did his job competently for the most part. Though seriously dude, go eat a sandwich, you're as skinny as a twig. The fairies of this season were some of the best in the franchise, right up there with Yes and Healing Goods. The latter in particular might have been end product of this show's fairy siblings, as their episodes were written mostly by Junko Komura, the head writer of Healing Good. It seems like she really favors the idea of having fairy partners be more than just cute mascots, which I can totally get behind. Both of them developed fairly significantly, with Puff starting off as a bit of an absent-minded airhead who started to gain a stronger grasp of the conflict they had been caught up in, and thus tried to support the heroine in spite of her very limited capabilities. Meanwhile, Aroma was about as annoying as an actual pigeon, often criticizing Haruka's clumsiness, though as we later learn, this is likely due to him trying to cope with his own feelings of not becoming a proper servant because he tried to force his ideals of what a proper royal is, rather than actually cooperating with his masters and their needs. In the end, both siblings learned how to more properly listen to and comply with the needs of their masters, and were some of the few fairies in the franchise to receive upgrades of their own. Great stuff for a couple of sidekicks who were, also cute as all hell. Miss Shamor was a mentor fairy character, though thankfully was far more active than some of those Yoda knockoffs. When needed, she did get involved in fights, especially at the end when things were dire, but otherwise, she did let her students prove their own worth. And when she wasn't teaching them, she was helping out the less fortunate, which included washed-up antagonists, as she truly believed that the ideals of princess etiquette should be shared amongst everyone, even sworn enemies. In general, she wasn't a complex character, but was still awesome, having some great designs, as well as somehow making Mayumi Shintani's voice work. Yeah, usually I'm not a big fan of this VA, as I think her voice is a little too shrill and doesn't quite match up with the character she plays, and yet this cat's quirkiness kinda made it work, especially with all the random broken English. Finally, let's talk about our main heroine, starting with one of the most tragic Sixth Rangers ever. Now, a lot of comparisons can be made between Towa and Setsuna. Both are Sixth Ranger Red Cures who pulled face turns after the Lead Pinks essentially deprogrammed them from brainwashing that they were put through at a young age. That said, while I consider Ise and Setsuna to be the same girl, as the latter was just made aware of the fact that she had been living under a totalitarian regime that she had a choice not to abide by, Towa was forcefully implanted with a mostly new personality. And thankfully, they did not hold back on this disturbingly dark fact, as Twilight was not only almost a complete monster, hell-bent on upholding her mother's ideals, she would also end up haunting Towa's nightmares throughout the series, as not only did she use her body to commit some great atrocities, but also robbed her of almost her entire childhood. It was actually kind of sad when she was reunited with her parents and Kanata, and they just barely recognized her because she had aged that much. And yet, Twilight did meet a rather tragic end when the personality was essentially killed off after Despair tricked her into using a tainted key. Bit of a shame because she was a pretty cool villainess with one of the best smug faces ever. Still, going back to a previous statement, I said mostly new personality because the truth is, had she not been kidnapped and later befriended the Precure, chances are Towa might have become a close approximation of Twilight minus the psychotic killer tendencies. Likely as a form of cruel irony, Despair seemed to not only let Twilight maintain Towa's base ideals of a princess, but she even seemed to foster them to illustrate how the pursuits in becoming the ultimate in something like princessdom wasn't too dissimilar as working towards being a harbinger of despair for others. In short, she turned the girl into Sonia Nevermind, especially the part about becoming an ultimate despair and all that. We could even see this shortly after she returned to being Towa, as again, while not malicious, there was still quite a bit of entitlement going on with her. After all, my jokes about the Lolicon kingdom aside, it was undeniable that Towa was mostly being coddled. As a result, while she was skilled in many areas, she was also socially inept and kind of spoiled. Thus, while much of her life was sadly taken away from her, in many ways, being taken away from Hope Kingdom and meeting her friends might have been the best thing to happen to Towa. She needed to learn that while treasuring her homeland was very admirable, she also needed to expand her horizons and learn how to become more self-reliant. As such, I kind of wish she had just abdicated the throne at the end of the series to really hit home that her kingdom and her needed to mature a little more. Sadly, they went with more of a cliche storybook ending, but still, the character herself was very likable thanks to having a very strong backstory and an arc where she learned how to live amongst us commoners.
闇を払い夢を照らす希望の炎
Moving on, we have the character whom, according to the NHK, after the actual main character, was the most popular cure to come out of this show, and while I personally don't agree with that, it's also hard not to see why. Kirara was unquestionably charismatic, like most quirky yellow cures, though for slightly different reasons than her contemporaries. Oh sure, she had her eccentricities, like just casually giving nicknames to people she hardly knew, but other than that, she was probably one of the biggest realists in this franchise, even initially refusing the call of heroism for perfectly valid reasons, as it would interfere with her work schedule. Thus, the major crux of her arc was trying to juggle everything in her life between the already ridiculous amount of modeling work she was doing at her age and being a superheroine. Understandably, this did lead her into becoming a bit of a nervous wreck, and thus at times she did need to learn from people like her mother and Towa how to loosen up a little, especially with a job that's all about images. However, at other times, her stressing out was kind of warranted. As while much of the time things just kind of worked out for her, eventually both her career and the conflict with the spear had advanced to their peaks. As such, trying to juggle both became pretty much impossible, and thus she had to make a choice, and ultimately she did choose the path that best suited her, which also meant that she would have to part ways with her friends. It was a very mature storyline for this franchise, acknowledging that sometimes you just can't have your cake and eat it too. Thankfully, they did resolve the conflict with the spear before she had to leave, but still a lot of credit should be given to Kirara and her hardworking spirit. Careers like hers are undoubtedly difficult, and yet this little star was determined to just keep on shining.
天の川キララの夢はこの星空みたいにキラキラ輝いてるんだから
Next up, we have the cure, who's probably filing a lawsuit against Laura for infringement. I mean, she has the money for it. Nah, but seriously, Minami was another fun, wealthy superheroine, though other than that goldmine of melons she just gave away in one episode, she also didn't exactly flaunt her inheritance like, say, Cure Money here. Instead, she was a hardworking business lady type who would always get things done with a lot of poise and elegance. Hell, she arguably came the closest to garnering some form of praise out of Twilight. And yet deep down, she clearly also didn't just want to be a leader all the time and wanted to be more friendly and supportive. But the prestige of her family's name meant that she couldn't show any weaknesses, which mistakenly could be translated to being unsociable and fearless, which also meant hiding her fear of ghosts. Yet, as the series went on, she was able to learn that showing a little weakness, especially amongst friends, was no big deal, and in fact, pretty beneficial in the long run. And I guess this did also lead into her ultimately choosing to change her dreams from corporate to biologist. Again, I'm not saying this stuff doesn't happen in real life, I just wish she was afforded a little more build towards this twist. Nothing against the character, and more against the show's overall story structure, but we'll get to that in just a bit. For now though, I will say I do actually like that they addressed the idea of changing career paths, and Minami was a fantastic example of this. Laura might be the more literal Cure Mermaid, but only one lady could pull this off with as much grace and style.
海と夢を汚す者は成敗します
Last up is a cure whom I already recently kind of covered in part 2 of my best toy leads video. As such, you can go watch that for some more details, but to sum it up, as well as maybe make a little correction to that video, I would more describe Haruka as the quintessential Mario of her series, the lead who's a jack of all trades, but master of none. Since she probably didn't know what the hell a princess was other than the broad ideals given to her in a picture book, Haruka tried to spread her dreams and abilities as widely as possible. This of course would lead to her spreading herself a little too thin at times and put a heavy strain on her. Thus, compared to her friends, including Yui, who were generally concentrating their efforts in one area, she was likely putting in a lot of wasted effort, but was still putting in the effort. Haruka by far was one of the most proactive cures, doing a lot of things at once. This did end up leaving her open to be mentally broken down by Close, who was dead set on defeating her, with the two having formed one of the best rivalries in the franchise. As I said, he only became as strong as he did in order to match up with the Precure, especially Haruka, and by the end, the two had essentially become the living embodiments of hope and despair, as well as the immovable object and the unstoppable force. Thus, having this rivalry end in a stalemate made perfect sense, as really, both sides need each other in order to exist. This really helped to play up Haruka's character and dream, which even by the end was a little unclear. While the epilogue very clearly showed what all of the other cures were up to, we were left with no idea what sort of dream Haruka ended up pursuing after the final battle. Did she get into tennis, dressmaking, ballet, or did she just become a NEET? We'll probably never know, and in the end, maybe it doesn't really matter. Deep down, she probably knew she'd never actually become a princess. In fact, only one member of her team was capable of doing such, and yet she still kept moving towards a dream that, while she might have to settle on some kind of occupation, it was one that also had no real set goal and could go on as long as she lived. While it's hard to tell what sort of flower Haruka bloomed into, we can at least say that she did bloom into something, all with some of the most admirable drive in this entire franchise.
Let's go, princess.
Overall, Go Princess had an amazing cast that really got the show's themes of dreams as well as hope and despair across really well, which was great because otherwise the story and plot progression were a little simplistic. Yeah, when you really get down to it, this show's main plot is not at all complicated and kind of becomes a basic good versus evil fight. It certainly did not have the strongest world building, resulting in stuff like Minami's arc just kind of progressing the way it did, even though there is a bit more of a transition between studying business and science. In fact, as I pointed out several times throughout these reviews, I think some of its themes like hope and despair were tackled much better in Danganronpa, especially in the first two games, which did come out a few years before this series, so yeah. I mean, not saying that they plagiarized or anything, but you can see the similarities. Yet, just like that franchise, it's all about the characters and how they address the themes. And in the end, our heroines and even some of the side characters brought a lot of emotion into this series, be it the dedication they put into achieving their dreams, or the depression that set in when they fell short. This was all told very well, helped with some very consistent pacing, even though this show did have the usual rotating door of writers in this franchise. Secondary writers were afforded the right to actually advance the plot significantly, allowing for some of the best second and third quarters of this franchise as they never felt like they meandered. As a result, much like Smile, I would call this a great beginner series for anyone who wants to get into this franchise, as the characters are what get you invested, and they're certainly not afraid of covering some of the deeper and darker stuff that come with growing up at such pivotal ages in most people's lives. Combine that with some excellent music and amazing animation, and you get a show that even some non-magical girl fans can get into. Unfortunately, that's not what Toei took away from the show bombing in the ratings and toy sales. We already went over some of the likely causes of the drop in ratings, but I'm starting to think there might have been some other reasons for the show's shortcomings. For instance, having bought these toys off of Amazon for significant markdowns, I can safely say that I think I might have overpaid a little. I mean, okay, take this all with a heavy grain of salt, as this is just my own conjecture, but I don't think this overcomplicated piece of junk would have sold well to its target audience, and no, I'm not saying that because I think they're dumb. I'm saying that as an adult who could barely figure out how this thing functions, that requires multiple button presses, and then eventually needing to reset it back to its starting position. It's certainly nowhere near as intuitive as, say, some of my Kamen Rider drivers, which on that note, I can objectively say that the build quality quality on this is nowhere near as good, with much weaker plastic to the point I almost thought this was a knockoff. And let's not forget how I had to completely repaint Twilight's key because all of these really have some very inaccurate paint jobs. Granted, while show accuracy might not bar the target audience, it does detract from the big fans, aka us, who are kind of sticklers for this sort of stuff. I don't know, maybe it's because I've become a bit of a really nerdy toy collector and model builder since this pandemic started, but stuff like this just does not impress me and makes me wonder if this has been the level of quality that they've tried to sell, and might have even been an issue with their products for a while, and might still be a problem based on some of Tropical Rouge's numbers regardless of said pandemic. If they can't appeal to either the target audience or the whales, then it was only inevitable that things would go south. Still, whatever the case, Toei saw Gold Princess as a massive failure and have tried to sweep it under the rug ever since, even though it still does have a significant following, and I think would have made for a much better crossover partner for the Tropical Rouge team. I mean, again, mermaids, come on! But yeah, because of it, the final years of the Heisei Precure were a bit of a mess, as Toei tried to do a lot of course correcting, like putting a lot more focus on ventures outside of toys, like very unhealthy sweets, or completely removing physical combat, which yeah, that was just plain stupid, considering that was the whole identity of this franchise. They also tried to bring in a lot of cheap, new writers who understandably couldn't be trusted with advancing significant plot points, leading to seasons where the pace was just all over the place. Also, allegedly, policies were put in place to put more focus on the first and fourth quarters of the series, rather than, just try to spread it all out evenly. I've certainly felt it ever since I started reviewing the latest seasons weekly, and while I do think we are at least on the upturn in quality as we've entered into the Reiwa era of Japan, I gotta say, it took a while for this franchise to find its grounding again. And unfortunately, this series ended up taking the brunt of the blame, even though again, I think a lot of it had to do with Toei's mismanagement of this franchise over the years finally coming to a head. Hopefully one day, though I highly doubt it, Toei will acknowledge their own faults and bring the series back into the prominence it deserves. After all, a major theme of the show was accepting the inevitability of despair in order to better ourselves in the long term. Bad things are always going to happen, but literally trying to sugarcoat them isn't going to do anyone any favors. And it's only once we accept these facts that we can truly start to achieve some amazing things. Thank you for watching this lengthy video. I gotta say, while I am trying to keep these things a little more concise than before, it's kind of hard to do it with this series because there was just so much I wanted to say about it. Still, it was nice to revisit one of my first big Precure videos before the vicious hammer of the copyright bot struck. But onwards and upwards, as after the Halloween video that I really hope I can get up in time for Halloween, we'll tackle the last of the Symphogear seasons with Access. Look forward to it, and until then though, farewell for now, my friends. And if you excuse me, I've got some serious painting to do.